School for inviting me here to speak today. I think the question, is Ireland a democratic republic, is really important at this moment in time when we're in the midst of great crisis, great uncertainty, great upheaval. And some of you, when I was thinking about today's session and thinking about Ireland's democracy, some of you might not know this, but Ireland is one of the 10 oldest democracies in the world. And for many people, at a basic level, democracy is characterised by the act of voting to choose your representatives. And in Ireland, we don't tend to think of our country as one of the oldest democracies, and our democratic heritage is rarely publicly celebrated. But nevertheless, we were one of the innovators and founders of increased public participation in government. I think it's a legacy worth remembering and defending. For example, Ireland was one of the first countries where women gained equal voting rights with men. Now, unfortunately, that hasn't translated into equal participation in the political system, and I'll be saying a bit more about that later on. Today, Ireland is one of what's considered to be 89 electoral democracies that are categorised as being free. And I think it's also important to remember that less than half the world's population live in free and democratic countries. So we're on the right half. So we have made progress on a number of fronts since the foundation of the state. We have a high level of stated public commitment to democratic values. We have a largely free, fair and representative electoral system. Citizens are largely well protected by the rule of law. We have a high level of press freedom, albeit biased in many respects. We also have, we're considered to have a strong system of protecting civil and political rights and a good record in supporting international law and human rights. Yet Irish democracy leaves a lot to be desired in many respects. Our performance can only be described as abysmal when it comes to the level of representation of women in public life. We're ranked 22nd out of 27 EU countries. Our Parliament is widely acknowledged to be one of the most ineffectual in Europe, with a weak system of parliamentary oversight of the government executive. And we haven't seen any major political reform in decades. A recent expert analysis of Ireland's political system by the late Peter Maher, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, demonstrates that Ireland compares very poorly as an effective democracy with other European countries. We have a citizenry which is largely disengaged and passive, and there's a distinct lack of innovation and lack of room of new ideas and new political styles. The political system has largely ceded control over policy making and policy design to the civil service. Historically, much was delegated to the institutions of the Catholic Church in regard to social policy, social welfare, health and education. An example of this was in 1948, when one of the first acts of a new government, I think it was a Fine Gael-led government, was to send a telegram to the Pope, stating the government's desire, and this is a quote here, to repose at the feet of your holiness the assurance of our filial loyalty and our devotion to your august person, as well as our firm resolve to be guided in all our work by the teaching of Christ, and to strive for the attainment of social order in Ireland based on Christian principles. Now, times have moved on, but political parties continue to absolve themselves of responsibility for governing or policy making. We have a polity which Mayor described as demobilised as well as demoralised. The culture of localism, nepotism, clientelism and even gombinism, which was well established before our 1937 constitution, remains a feature of politics at the national and local level today. Now, the current programme for government sets out a programme of constitutional and political reforms. And they aim to address many of the weaknesses in our democracy, including the abolition of the Seanad, a constitutional convention, strengthening key Dáil committees, and measures aimed at improving Oireachtas' oversight of the government executive. Now, the Seanad is certainly in need of reform, but rather than abolishing it, it could be reconstructed as a more representative body that adds value to the mandate of a reformed Dáil. In general, though, if the commitments of the programme for government are delivered on, they have the potential to strengthen our democracy. But I believe they are insufficient and inadequate to address the structural weaknesses that exist in our democracy. Weaknesses that have been clearly articulated by the likes of Peter Maher and others, and which were brought into sharp focus by the financial and economic crisis that broke in 2008. The Irish state is democratic, but it has not developed as a republic underpinned by the principles of equality, liberty and fraternity. The challenge is to freshly articulate a new vision imbued with democratic and republican ideals that would transform Irish society into one that expands the freedom, equality and fulfilment of every person and ensures the common good for all. High levels of poverty and inequality have a direct effect on the quality of our democracy, and this has been exacerbated by the current crisis through austerity measures. Poverty and inequality were not addressed during the course of the boom. Even when the country was awash with money, there was never enough to tackle poverty in a real and meaningful way. Hospital waiting lists or waiting lists for school psychologists. So there was a huge missed opportunity there. And I think there was an acceptable level, well, the thinking might have been, I'm only surmising here, there was an acceptable level of inequality so long as social peace was maintained. Much of the mindset was based on the myth that rising tides lift all boats. Hence, it was accepted wisdom to cut taxes, to attract international investment, to lighten up on regulation, and to privatise key areas of social infrastructure such as health and social housing. The current crisis, which has given rise to widespread apathy, distrust, cynicism and hopelessness, is the fruit of a crisis in values at the core of our global economic system that puts profits and markets before people. How can we say that political life is democratic when economic power is concentrated in the hands of a few and easily converted into unconstrained political power? Economic power shapes political power. Therefore, economic equality is a necessary precondition for greater political equality. We can't achieve a fully functioning democratic republic in the absence of greater equality, economic and political. A direct effect of the current economic system is growing inequality. This has led to the concentration of wealth and political power, which means relations of inequality becomes relations of arbitrary power and dependence. The consequence of this, in turn, is the erosion of solidarity and mutual connection between the wealthy and the powerful and the less wealthy and the powerless, as well as growing alienation. Low voter turnout is just one result. Social unrest is another. You look at the recent riots in the UK and also the political upheaval in many Arab states. Coming back to voter turnout is lowest in poorer areas, as we all know. It's also concentrated amongst young people and the unemployed, and consequently they don't have a lot of political influence. The converse is the case of older people who vote in large numbers, and we need only cast our minds back to the medical card debacle to see political influence in action. It's also abundantly clear that our democratic republic has failed, and is failing, to make provision for the physical, mental and spiritual well-being of its children. All we have to do is listen to the recent reports from desperate parents of disabled children trying to access primary education for their children. These children are being turned away from our primary schools, and parents are trying to make the most of totally inadequate education services. Our democratic republic has also failed to safeguard the health of its people through the creation of a universal system of healthcare accessed on the basis of need rather than income. Inequalities in the access to healthcare services are causing preventable deaths and ill health. Inequality in access to the Irish healthcare system compounds existing inequalities in the health status of the Irish population. So, for example, traveller men die 15 years younger than settled men. Traveller women die just over 11 years less than settled women. Now, successive governments have reinforced the fundamental fault line of the Irish health system: unequal access for public patients who are usually sicker and poorer. Unequal access to education and health are just two examples of how our democratic republic is failing its citizens. So it's hard to know we have to ask ourselves, where do we begin the process of reform? Addressing the crisis requires a return to first principles and an assessment of the Constitution, the capacity of the state's institutions, and critically, the relationship of the state with its citizens. I think the time is ripe for us to reconstitute, restructure, and rethink our political and economic systems. It has become abundantly clear that they are not fit for purpose and have failed to serve Irish people well, or even competently. The future well-being of our people cannot be secured with failed systems. We need to shift the debate towards a new understanding of citizenship that is not limited to a narrow legal and political definition of status. It's not possible to talk about inclusive citizenship without considering people's access to jobs, incomes, housing, health, education, political and organisational power, information, media, art and culture. The National Economic and Social Council has set out a clear understanding of well-being, which I think is consistent with citizenship in a democratic republic. People's well-being is enhanced by conditions that include financial and personal security, meaningful and rewarding work, supportive personal relationships, strong and inclusive communities, good health and a healthy and attractive environment, and values of democracy and social justice. There is a clear need for a new contract between the citizen and the Irish state, involving a new constitution and a range of reforms. We need reforms to the electoral system, the Oireachtas, and we need other essential reforms involving the development of new and innovative means of public participation and deliberation. An example of some fresh thinking and innovative public participation recently took place in Iceland, with the selection of 1,000 citizens at random from the National Registry to attend the National Conference on the Constitution. And those people were charged with leading the process of rewriting the Icelandic Constitution. The process included, and it might be still ongoing, the use of social media, and along with the Constitutional Council's website, where new parts of the working draft are uploaded and rewritten to include public consensus. They also use Twitter, Facebook, as well as a YouTube channel dedicated to the drafting process. This has had a huge impact in actually engaging young people in the process of rewriting the Constitution. In this way, the Constitutional Council in Iceland emphasises an open communication with the Icelandic people and has given them the opportunity to participate in the formation of a new constitution. The redrafted constitution will be put to the people later this year, I think. Now, our programme for government includes plans for a constitutional convention, but it's not clear yet how it's going to work, who's going to be involved, how they're going to be selected. There's lots of questions in terms of ensuring that it reflects a wide section of society. But never was a radical approach to constitutional reform more needed, and inspiration should be taken from the Icelandic people. I think there's a shared sense that we need to become more a republic in fact rather than theory, and that power must be more effectively vested in all of the people. Democratic Republican values of equality can be translated into policy and institutions by way of policies that promote mutual protections and social justice, through, for example, a minimum income, strong employment rights, and the basic infrastructure to provide for basic needs, such as education, housing, health, income, and legal aid. In a democratic republic, public policy must be focused on addressing inequality. The provision of high-quality, universal, and accessible public services are key to reducing inequality, but these services cannot be provided without sufficient levels of taxation. Government policy is still wedded to the low-tax, low-spend model, a model that has failed and has exacerbated inequalities, and it also undermines the quality and functioning of our democratic republic. A different approach is required, and that approach involves having tax levels at a level that's benchmarked against average European countries. Taxes should be collected progressively, with a tax base including all forms of income and wealth, combined with high compliance and enforcement. Gender equality should be the litmus test for a democratic republic. The lack of women in political life and at the highest levels of decision making in the public and private sectors shows us that we have a long way to go. We have a clear democratic deficit when half of the population is underrepresented to the extent that it is. Gender quotas have been shown to work in other countries, and if we really wanted to address this issue of the demographic deficit, I think it's high time that similar action was taken in Ireland. However, no group will ever get a fair share of resources and decision-making powers unless it's fully engaged in the democratic system. But as we know, there are real limits to political participation. Social capital provides the foundations for active citizenship, which is essential for a functioning democracy and a functioning republic. Active citizenship provides people with a sense of wider social concern and the capacity to participate deliberately in self-government. Recent budgetary decisions have reversed earlier progress in enabling and empowering equality of voice and an active civil society. It's high time for a second republic, a democratic republic of equals in theory and practice. Thank you.